Okay, yes. Like Jack said, we're going to do a question and answer session with him and the other two speakers as well at the end. So hold your questions for the end. So with that, I'd like to bring up our next speaker, Chris Porter, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at Fannie Mae and a Fair Institute Board of Advisor member. So Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Luke. Awesome. All right, so I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes or so just talking about a little bit around how we've been leveraging FAIR within our organization. And I wanted to talk first a little bit about strategy and how strategy and risk and scarcity all interact with one another. And I think, Jack went over this a little bit, but ultimately this comes down to prioritization. So how do companies typically think about their strategy? It's all about choices, right? The company makes certain choices that create business value for the organization. Usually there's two forms of strategy, right? There's growth, where they're trying to make more revenue, or there's the cost sort of cutting strategy. And unfortunately, we are in the era in security where, typically what we do is creating costs for the organization in order to reduce the risk that they go. And I've heard this really good metaphor that I really like where, people talk about security stopping the business from being able to do the things they want to do. But ultimately, the reason that there's brakes in cars is so that they can go fast, right, with confidence. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to do when we're trying to prioritize risks and prioritize cyber risks is we're trying to act like the brakes in the car so that the company can go fast, they can build value quicker without the fear of something catastrophic happening. But there is budget scarcity, right? You have to make choices and we have to make prioritization decisions on what is most important in the organization to mitigate first before anything else. You don't want to mitigate risks that don't matter, especially ones that create incredible costs to the organization that are the wrong kinds of breaks for the organization. Has everyone heard or read the article from Wired magazine a couple years ago from Andy Greenberg? When you think about cyber risk, at the end of the day, it is actually business risk. And this article by Andy Greenberg was fascinating. It read like a novel, except everything was true. But it was the story of Maersk and NotPetya, and how within about 5 seconds, they were navigating by stars, right? So within 5 seconds, their entire network had been encrypted with this destructive malware. And the only reason that they were able to recover is because there was a domain controller in Ghana that happened to be offline at the time. And they were able to take this domain controller and fly it up to London like it was an organ transplant in order to rebuild their entire network. So actually part of my risk analysis and FAIR analysis is that I've put domain controllers in Ghana as well in order to reduce this. But the idea is that all of these things intersect. You have to understand the risks to your organization. You have to understand how your organization makes money in order to properly manage and mitigate those risks. And that helps you make better business decisions. One of my favorite stories to tell is how I've got this slide that shows that we were in a really bad credit monitoring and notification contract. I won't share the name of that company, but essentially we had a dollar loss per record for every record loss regardless of uptake on credit monitoring. Which basically meant on the left there, we had this linear curve that went straight up for every record loss. And going through the FAIR analysis, some of it's just collecting the data, right? Like one, understanding how your company makes money is important. You gotta understand how your losses will be affected. Some of it's collecting data like this, where you understand, like if you have a data breach, like what are some of the costs that you would have around a data breach? So we went through and collected this data and realized that we were in this terrible contract. And we were able to then go back and renegotiate, because most of the time, it's only 3 to 10% of your company, or of your customers, or the borrowers in our situation, that would actually have credit monitoring costs. And so I've got this great slide where I can show we reduced more cyber risk by changing a contract than we did by encrypting all of the social security numbers in all of our databases across the entire organization. That's pretty phenomenal, right? This wasn't a technical control. This was a recovery control. And it was a contract. It didn't require an investment other than lawyer time for negotiating with our credit monitoring notification company. But I think that's one of the real powerful things when you start doing this analysis, is you can find these little nuggets where you can affect real change, real cyber risk reduction, and sometimes it's not by investing in anything at all. The other piece is around making decisions about picking the right level of cyber insurance. Like, if you understand what your losses are going to be, then you can make the right decisions on what level of cyber insurance that you need. You can look at your annual loss expectancies. You can look at your tail risk over time, and then you're not overspending. Because anytime you overspend, as Jack mentioned earlier, that means you're not spending things that are creating business value to the organization. And lastly, regulatory. So what we found, through our journey into FAIR and in meeting our various regulatory requirements, is that it's not just doing the analysis. You have to be able to prove that you're doing your risk analysis. I mean, that's the whole idea around compliance. It's not just raising the bar on what controls you have within your organization. It's not just doing certain actions, but you have to prove to those regulatory bodies that you're doing the things that you say you're doing. And one of the great things about leveraging FAIR is it's black and white. You have the ability to show specifically how you're doing the analysis, what data you're using, what model you're using, what are the results, how are you making the right decisions, how are you making the right investments in your program, and then they get off your back. And that's ultimately what all CISOs want, is to have your auditors and regulatory folks sort of off your back. So then you can actually do the real jobs of leveraging your program, reducing risk across the organization. But I added this in here just to show, like, NIST, specifically. We know that the NIST cybersecurity framework, there's specific language in there around leveraging risk assessments. And this has given us a powerful tool to show our auditors, our regulatory bodies, our partners, that we're leveraging risk, or leveraging FAIR as a good way to manage risk across our organization. All right. Let's flip it over to the next speaker.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you, Chris.